The primary sensor on the tactical bridge highlighted a liquid trail that should not have existed. Petra Wren moved across the Sector 7 grasslands with a persistence that contradicted the thermal readings, her body shedding moisture, a shimmering coat of high-temperature fluid, which meant the biological sensors were either failing or witnessing a mutation. Vorthani archives are filled with failed pursuits, but this record is the only one that led to a total ban on human engagement. You will understand the weight of that decision shortly. The exercise had begun with a mundane preparation that Commander Vex now replayed with mounting unease. On the recording from the hangar bay, Petra had not checked her sidearm or calibrated a cloaking field. Instead, she had sat on a gear crate, meticulously double-knotting her synthetic boots, a mechanic's habit of ensuring no loose ends could snag on the long road ahead. She had looked up at the Vorthani tracking team with a slight, pleasant smile that Vex had initially dismissed as a lack of situational awareness. She was the designated evading asset, yet she moved with the casual grace of a civilian on a holiday. The Vorthani were pursuit predators, built for the explosive expenditure of energy followed by the necessary silence of a cooling cycle. We sprint, we catch, or we rest. It was biological law. But as hour 12 arrived, the tracking teams realized the human was not following the law. She maintained a steady 5 kilometers per hour, her mechanic's gaze fixed on the horizon, her pace never wavering even as the terrain turned into steep, rolling hills of jagged obsidian glass. Confirm the humidity levels in the human's proximity, Vex ordered, his eyes locked on the steady, 4-step gate on the screen. 70%, Tactical Officer Korvax replied, his secondary lungs clicking with the effort of tracking the data. She should be drowning in her own heat, Commander. Her internal core remains steady at 37 degrees, yet her dermal surface is weeping at a rate of 3 liters per hour. She was walking. The surveillance drone captured the wet, rhythmic slap of boots on grass. Every pore on her skin was an active thermal exhaust, utilizing the evaporative power of her own sweat to achieve a stability the Vorthani only found in absolute stillness. Humans possessed millions of these glands, a biological radiator system that allowed them to move through heat that would boil the blood of a sprinting predator. Hour 24 arrived without a single pause in her forward motion. The first Vorthani tracking team had already rotated out, their core temperatures pushing the red line of safety, their mouths open in the wide, desperate panting of a species that had reached its thermal limit. Beneath the humming tactical display, the floor plates vibrated with the ship's steady pulse, a stark contrast to the silence in the command room. Vex watched the infrared feed as the human reached a small stream. She did not stop to rest her muscles. She simply knelt, filled her canteen, and drank while her legs remained coiled for the next step. By the 36th hour, the second tracking team was flagging. They were elite soldiers, trained to chase the fastest herbivores in the sector, but they were tethered to the requirement of the rest cycle. Every 40 minutes of movement required 20 minutes of shade and deep, rhythmic lung venting. The human, however, had not stopped to pant. She was simply walking, the salt from her dried coolant beginning to crust in white streaks against her dark uniform. Is she aware of the interceptors? Vex asked, his voice low. The sensors confirm she has spotted them twice, Korvax whispered. She waved at them both times. By hour 60, the Vorthani High Command had stopped treating the feed as a training exercise and started viewing it as a looming disaster. Korvax sat with his head in his hands, his skin pale and dry, his body refusing to regulate heat after 30 hours of stop-and-start pursuit. On the screen, Petra Wren's boots continued their steady, 5-kilometer-per-hour impact on the sun-baked clay. She had surpassed the biological limits of every predator in the sector. The liquid coating her skin was not a malfunction of her biology. It was the engine of her immortality. Through the magnifying lens of the surveillance drone, Vex saw the microscopic beads of moisture, sweat, forming and evaporating in a continuous cycle, carrying away the heat that should have charred her brain. The question destroyed 3 centuries of Vorthani military doctrine in a single breath. Commander Vex ordered the exercise terminated at hour 72. He watched the human on the screen stop, check her chronometer, and turn toward the base. She didn't sprint back to find shade. She simply kept walking at that same maddening pace. When she finally crossed the threshold of the tactical command bay, Petra paused for a second to wipe a dark smudge of engine grease from her left knuckle with the tail of her salt-crusted shirt. "The pursuit is over," Vex said, his voice grating in the silence. "Did I lose?" Petra asked, her brow furrowing as she looked at the rows of collapsed soldiers and the flickering thermal displays. "I thought it was just a terrain familiarization hike. Was I supposed to run?" We had designed our entire defense strategy around the assumption that an enemy would eventually need to pant. We believed in the safety of distance, assuming that if we could move fast enough, we could force the pursuer into a cooling cycle. But humans do not need a cycle. They possess between 2 and 4 million eccrine glands, a dense network of thermal regulators capable of dumping up to 4 liters of fluid per hour. They do not chase prey. They follow it with the terrifying certainty of a glacier. They simply wait for the world to stop moving, and then they arrive. The stakes shifted from a simple training failure to an existential threat. If the Vorthani ever found themselves on the wrong side of a human grievance, there would be no escape. We could sprint for miles, burning our lungs and hearts in a desperate bid for distance, but the human would just keep walking. They are persistence hunters, the only creatures in the galaxy who weaponized the very act of existing in the sun. Korvax, a veteran of 40 combat cycles, couldn't look her in the eye during the final debriefing. He sat with his hands trembling, his fingers tracing the rim of an empty cooling gel pack, unable to reconcile the mechanic's pleasant smile with the biological monster that had just walked his elite team into the ground. 5 days later, as Petra Wren prepared to board her shuttle back to the human sector, she left a small note on the tactical bridge. She had invited the staff for a brisk morning walk before her departure. No one responded. No one went to the docking bay to say goodbye. The silence was not born of malice, but of a new, cold reality that had settled over the command. The tactical display flickers with the archive track of Sector 7. On the desk, a small water canteen sits empty beside a stack of revised pursuit bands. Outside the viewport, the sun beats down on the red grasslands. The wind ripples through the stalks without meeting a single footfall. A pair of synthetic boots sits by the airlock, their laces tied in tight, double knots.